We're so glad to have everyone gathered today. Thanks so much for coming along. This is an annual event that we all very much look forward to, and even more so now that the pandemic has prevented us from seeing each other as easily in person and being at our museum together. A few housekeeping items. This will be recorded and put online after our event, and so any questions asked during the discussion will be public. We welcome any that you have. We are grateful for the sponsorship of the Pew Center for Arts and Heritage, the Groff Family Memorial Trust, and the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission. I want to thank the many hands across partnerships who have brought this project to life at the Mutter Museum. We can't wait to share it with you here, and, if you can make it, in person soon. Today, we will spend around 30 minutes talking about designing motherhood, a project that we're excited to show you and which has just opened at the Mutter Museum. In the summer of 2018, we got an email from two design historians, Michelle Miller-Fisher and Amber Winnick. Their research centered on designs for the arc of human reproduction, and they wondered if we would partner with them and their wonderful collaborators, the Maternity Care Coalition of Philadelphia, to create an exhibition. We had been doing research of our own into a possible display of Mutter objects dedicated to reproductive health, and Chrissy's library pop-ups had foregrounded our collection of midwifery manuals. So we said yes, and a partnership was, well, born. Our collaboration has produced the exhibition now at the museum. Amber and Michelle, over to you to introduce the genesis of the idea.
Thanks so much, Anna. As you're going to hear from us as we speak today, the Cadwallader Gallery is filled with different designs that will help us to consider more closely the arc of human reproduction through the lens of design. There are so many ways into the Designing Motherhood project and several different origin moments, but one of them comes around 2015 with this object just here, and you'll see it in the exhibition too. At the time, I was working at MoMA and suggested that it would work well in the museum's design collection. Swedish civil engineer Einar Egnell was one of the first to design a breast pump by specifically observing human rather than bovine anatomy after his friend, a gynecologist, challenged him to improve upon existing technologies in the mid-1950s. The resulting Egnell SMB breast pump was named for the nurse, Sister Mary, who collaborated on its testing in concert with new mothers in Stockholm's major maternity hospital. In our Designing Motherhood book, we argue that it and other designs like it fit squarely into a history of design begun by this exhibition, Machine Art, the very first exhibition of modern and contemporary design in the Western world, held in 1934 and curated by Alfred Barr, the director of the museum, and Philip Johnson, the inaugural curator of architecture and design. They took objects like you see on the screen just here and many others like them, a self-aligning ball bearing, a glass beaker, an airplane propeller, and they put them on white pedestals in the museum gallery, elevating them much like a Brancusi sculpture. Although it would have been anachronistic to put a 1956 breast pump into the mix of this 1930s exhibition, Egnell's pump looked absolutely the part. It was also a perfect fit in terms of the history of hidden labor and home gadgets made by mostly men for consumption and use by women in order that they might do more than one thing at a time. We were rebuffed gently by MoMA for our idea. And indeed, the idea for an exhibition or our book was not really given much space or time at any of the museums at which I've worked or at which we had contacts. And so we decided to start our own project, which really began in public with the Designing Motherhood Instagram channel, which is still very much active as an outward-facing way to share our progress with this project. We knew from the start that the core of the project would be a book as well as an exhibition. And so we're going to publish that this fall through MIT Press. It's been designed by the wonderful Klonada team based between Brooklyn and Croatia. And it's packed with over 250 images that include found photography, museum objects, archival images from a range of different collections, and spreads of artists' images. The book covers everything from the home pregnancy test, born in 1970 and designed by graphic designer Meg Crane, which you see on the left just here, and also pairs it with its contemporary cousin, Leah, designed here in Philadelphia in the last couple of years. And it's the first flushable biodegradable pregnancy test. And it goes from objects and products like these all the way through to maternity wear. In every way, our partnerships across institutions allowed this project to flourish. I'm really proud and very delighted to say that it was the Mutter Museum, Robert and Anna and Nancy and many others who gave this project the light of day. They were the first person to ever say yes to it, and so we're incredibly grateful for that. But I'm going to hand over to Zoe just now to explain a little more about the other hands and partnerships we have in this project. So Zoe, over to you.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, I'm Zoe Greggs, and I work at Maternity Care Coalition, and I'm also a curatorial assistant on the Designing Motherhood project. Maternity Care Coalition has been based here in Philadelphia for about 40 years. Our 40th anniversary is actually this year, and works to ensure families can birth with dignity, parent with autonomy, and raise babies who are healthy, growing, and thriving. Through a range of direct services that are deeply rooted in culturally appropriate care, MCC helps birthing people connect with doula services, lactation support, early childhood education, and much more. We are the thought leaders for this project, and in addition to partnering with the wonderful team at the Mutter Museum, we are also holding an exhibition at the Center for Architecture and Design in September of this year. And we have been working with Penn's Weitzman School of Design to bring some of the learnings and research from the DM project to their students as a curriculum intervention. We divided the Cadwallader Gallery at the Mutter Museum into 5 stories, constellations of objects that help spark conversations about design for the arc of human reproduction with visitors. You'll hear members of the curatorial and exhibitions team talk about just some of the works that will be on display in the gallery, in constellations designed by our wonderful exhibition designers, Helen Kung and Michael Keys, with graphics by Shaz Mandani. Over to you, Amber, to introduce our first story.
Thanks so much, Zoe, and thank you, Michelle and Anna. So one of the stories, as Zoe said, focuses on midwives and birth companions, and it's the first constellation of objects people will see as they enter the Cadwallader Gallery. Some of the objects visitors will encounter are a selection of historical and contemporary midwifery manuals, an early fetal heartbeat listening device that's still used by midwives today, umbilical scissors, and a gorgeous film called All My Babies, a midwife's own story, which looks at the design of midwifery-led models of care, zeroing in on a time of great transition in the US. Some of you may have seen All My Babies, which was released in 1953 as a training aid for midwives and other health professionals at a time when birth was moving from the home to the hospital. By foregrounding the midwife Mary Frances Hill Coley, the film depicts the critical role of Black midwives in communities across the American South. We follow Ms. Coley into the homes of actual patients and witness her attending 2 planned home births. Commissioned by the Georgia Department of Public Health, Director George C. Stoney shadowed Ms. Coley for 4 months in Albany, Georgia. The directive from state officials was to include 118 separate points within the film, from managing relationships between the midwife and public health specialists, to breathing techniques during labor, to incorporating partners and siblings into the birthing process. Stoney was partially inspired by the work of Italian neorealist directors, whose films of the 1940s and early 1950s were shot on location using non-professional actors and foregrounded the stories of the poor and working class. However, it was the evocative photographs of Gordon Parks, Walker Evans, Dorothea Lange, and others who, commissioned by the Farm Security Administration, documented the Great Depression that Stoney cited as most influential. While some acting was involved, actual homes, streetscapes, and medical offices were the backdrop for prenatal exams, and the film centers on and shows in detail 2 births that Coley attends with skill, high standards of hygiene, and crucially, culturally appropriate care practices. Filmed during the Jim Crow era, the film records the uncomfortable and enforced deference of Black midwives interacting with white doctors and nurses at the county clinic. In fact, one of the most heavily scripted parts of the film shows Coley questioning her own excellent hygiene practices after a group lecture by white doctors and nurses. All My Babies foreshadows the decline of Black midwives who once provided critical and culturally appropriate care for poor and rural pregnant women of all races throughout the American South. Indispensable within their communities, they passed their knowledge down through generations, during the institutionalized racism and violence of slavery in the antebellum period. Black midwives were also crucial during segregation at a time when Black women were often denied admittance to hospitals. Midwife-attended home birth was frequently the only viable option for Black families. The film paints a rare portrait of how Coley's model of care coexisted alongside the growing medical industrial complex and of how Black midwives and their patients worked within a medical racist system. Today, the legacy of Black midwifery continues and is even experiencing a renaissance. Pictured here are two of our heroes, the incredible Philly-based midwife Asasia Muhammad of Inner Circle Midwifery, as well as Jenny Joseph of Common Sense Childbirth, which is a prenatal clinic, birthing center, and school of midwifery training the next generation of Black midwives in Florida. We're really proud to have all my babies in the exhibition. Now over to you, Juliana and Nancy.
Thank you so much, Amber. I'm going to share a design from the story we call The Means of Reproduction, centered around how people have used design to gain and assert control over their reproductive capacity. Intrauterine devices, commonly known as IUDs, are one such design. IUDs are small, variously shaped, and usually made of polyethylene or copper. They're inserted into the uterus by a medical professional to prevent the process of insemination and implantation of an egg. As a method of contraception, IUDs are reliable and usually safe. Today, their design is highly regulated in part because of one particular IUD, the Dalkon shield. The Dalkon shield's wick, circled on the screen, allowed bacteria to enter the uterus and caused widespread pelvic inflammatory disease and subsequent infertility. By the time it was discontinued in the late 1980s, it had been administered to approximately 2.5 million women in the United States and Puerto Rico. One of those women was Loretta J. Ross, who had a Dalkon shield implanted in the 1970s with disastrous consequences. A pioneer of the reproductive justice movement, Ross has tirelessly shared her own story in order to prevent future generations from suffering as she did. We interviewed Ross for the book, as our project has sought to foreground such first-person experiences of the designs we highlight. I'm going to share some of that interview now. Quote, "The design flaw was the wick. It caused an infection that caused me to lapse into a coma, and I underwent a total hysterectomy at the age of 23. It ended my fertility prematurely. By age 25, I was experiencing menopausal symptoms. I wasn't able to give permission for the hysterectomy. There was no informed consent. I did not wake up until the doctor who had performed my hysterectomy, who was the head of OBGYN services at the George Washington University Hospital Center in Washington, D.C., was standing by my bedside. He was the same doctor who for 6 months had been misdiagnosing my symptoms as a venereal disease, or what we call an STD today. He didn't remove my Dalkon shield until my fallopian tubes erupted." End quote. We'd like to recognize and thank all those like Ross who shared their stories for this project. Now over to you, Nancy.
We have invited a few contemporary artists into the exhibition checklist, one of whom is Martha Pagoli, who has a particular research interest in reproductive health designs and is currently an artist in residence at the Dittrich Museum in Cleveland. She has created a timeline of IUD patents, which take various forms when it is displayed, but in this exhibition, it's a vertical banner. Each of the patent drawings are proposed inventions and not necessarily objects that were ultimately manufactured or distributed. Their designers saw sufficient value in designing each of the object's claims and hoped they would eventually be manufactured and serviced to the people. This chronological mapping visualizes an evolution of reproductive tools and typologies within the category A61F in the Cooperative Patent Category Classification System, subclassification 6/00. Contraceptive devices, pessaries, applicators. Over to you for story 3, Robert.
Thank you, Nancy. What vital instrument for monitoring women's reproductive health began with fingers and a spoon? Well, here's a hint. Closed fingers make a cone-shaped probe. Inserted in the body, fingers open to dilate the birth canal. This hand technique suggested a tool, leading to perhaps the earliest diagnostic instrument in medicine, the vaginal speculum. For centuries, the speculum remained the only tool to permit intrusive examination of the uterus via the vaginal canal. On the upper right, you see a large instrument, which is a reproduction of a Roman 2,000-year-old speculum. The speculum did not only provide a means to monitor women's health. For centuries, tampering with a woman's genitalia was believed to modify or control her behavior. Until recently, physicians, predominantly male, believed that disturbances to the uterus changed women's behavior. Hysteria became a code term for psychological problems rooted in the uterus, especially sexual deviancy. The speculum underwent adaptation and elaboration during the late 1800s as gynecology became a medical specialty, almost exclusively of male doctors. Enter the reputed father of American gynecology, J. Marion Sims. Sims doubtless improved the health of women by inventing a method of repairing the vesico-vaginal fistula, the tearing of the birth canal during childbirth, which results in the bladder emptying into the vaginal canal and discharging urine through the vagina. But he achieved success with his method only after years of experimental surgery on enslaved Black women in the 1840s, without anesthesia even when available. The enslaved patients whose names are known, Betsy, Anarcha, and Lucy, endured many surgeries to fix their distressing condition. In the slide with the Roman speculum, you see one that's very similar design by Sims. And in the next slide, you see two images of the same tool, which is also called a duckbill speculum, also designed by Sims. Today, more than 60 million pelvic exams with specula take place in the United States annually. The San Francisco design firm Frog for Women questioned why the speculum has not changed to better serve women who, in the present century, have also used the instrument for self-examination. Based on their research, they have created a new speculum called Yona. According to Frog, Yona is designed for people with vaginas by people with vaginas. I now introduce you to Anna Doty once again, curator and co-director of the Mutter Museum, who has another mysterious medical instrument to talk about. Anna?
Thank you, Robert. One of the most famous instruments for the safe delivery of babies was a secret for over a century. Even women giving birth were not permitted to see it. This instrument is now about 4 centuries old and has never been without controversy. I am talking about obstetrical forceps, a tool invented by a French Huguenot in England who had fled religious persecution, Peter Chamberlain. When summoned, the Chamberlain family arrived at the house of the expectant mother, blindfolded her, and banished everyone else from the room. They even used distracting noises, such as bells, to mask the sound of metal on metal. Forceps made the Chamberlain family rich. Eventually, the secret came out. These forceps, dubbed the Hands of Iron, were presented to the Royal Academy in Paris. Obstetrical forceps quickly gained favor within the medical community, and other physicians immediately began improving on the design. By the mid-1700s, forceps had both cephalic and pelvic curves, increasing safety for both the mother and child. Public exposure meant controversy. Some doctors favored the use of forceps, others opposed it. Lack of knowledge on proper placement of forceps and the amount of force applied, especially in the hands of untrained people, gave forceps the potential to end life. Eventually, new forceps designs appeared. People's ideas about women's bodies and pregnancy were changing. Childbirth itself was defined as abnormal. The pregnant woman became pathological and in need of medical intervention. Forceps and other obstetrical tools also allowed the physician increased control over women's bodies and birth. The 20th century saw an increase in hospital births. With more women under heavy sedation and unable to effectively push, the prophylactic use of forceps became standard practice. Eventually, less invasive procedures like vacuum-assisted birth and the more invasive cesarean section appeared and effectively sidelined obstetrical forceps. Over to you, Gabriella.
Thanks so much, Anna. I'm introducing the last story featuring the constellation of objects that spark dialogue about milk, specifically through the lens of an object I know very well and that I use to feed my son August, the breast pump. Early mechanical breast pumps were clunky, loud, and fairly painful for the lactating parents that used them. Michelle showed the pump developed by Einar Egnell, a Swedish civil engineer in the 1950s. Even though that was an innovative design at the time, I'm glad we've moved far from there. Pumps were confined to medical quarters and thus available to relatively few new parents. Most people were giving birth outside of medical institutions, as we learned from the film All My Babies that Amber spoke about, until later in the 20th century. The at-home electric pump, an earlier iteration of the kind that I use, was not developed and widely marketed until the early 1990s, and breast pumps experienced their biggest public boost in 2010, when the newly passed Affordable Care Act mandated that insurance must cover their use. One of the design stories we hope to tell is of innovation, and until recently, the relative lack of it. The breast pump is operated out of sight, behind a locked door and hiding the labor involved, a work output historically not matched by the effort to design the machine itself. In 2017, writer Jessica Winter pointed out in The New Yorker the surprising and incalculable lack of investment in product designs for pregnant people and the amount of money Silicon Valley kingmakers are leaving on the table by shunning women, mothers, and babies. Breast pumps make up a $700 million market with ample room to grow. The contemporary design updates include the second generation of the Embra cordless willow, which is super expensive, and the Haka manual pump, which is much cheaper, that seals to the breast and can work independently or be manually massaged. The subject of breastfeeding exists within debates around familial leave policies, working parents, morality, infant mortality, and the formula market. In this turbulent landscape, the personal portable breast pump has played a crucial role. Its design and technological development has enabled lactating parents to be away from their babies and still feed them with their own milk. Modella's mini electric breast pump debuted in 1991 and radically changed the design of breast pumps. It was lightweight and less expensive than hospital-grade equipment, allowing parents agency and choice. The pumps pictured here illustrate two key moments in a trajectory of innovations in breast pump design over the last 4 decades. While lactation breaks and spaces are now required by federal law, many workspaces still lack adequate facilities. As MIT's Make the Breast Pump Not Suck hackathons in 2014 and 2018 highlighted, by its very existence, the pump exposes the lack of a far more holistic design for family leave. Over the past 5 years, a multidisciplinary group of designers, technologists, and community partners have convened twice at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's Media Lab to reimagine the future of one of the most universal human experiences, breastfeeding. In 2014, over 100 people gathered to rethink the breast pump, a technology that has rarely been a focus for the majority of product and industrial designers. 4 years later, in 2018, a second gathering widened the focus to a redesign of policy surrounding paid familial leave, breastfeeding in public spaces, and healthcare innovation. The summit convened 300 collaborators from diverse backgrounds to create better products, programs, policies, and systems to support breastfeeding and pumping with a focus on equity. By adapting and co-opting the hackathon format, at this point, a fairly conventional staple of tech culture, Make the Breast Pump Not Suck serves as an interventionist project that aims to change the culture of technology design. Their next hackathon takes place this spring.
Thanks, Team DM. That hopefully gives people just a taste of what they will experience in this small but perfectly formed exhibition. And we're very happy now to answer any questions that you might have about it or the wider Designing Motherhood project.